Hello, and welcome to another live chapter reading of Shamrock and Clover, Fields Apart by C.A. King, as presented by Itsy Bitsy Book Bits. Shamrock and Clover, Fields Apart. A shamrock has 3 leaves. A clover can have more. Faith, hope, and love are standard, but luck is always number 4. Chapter 1, Clover. Human rights belong to everyone. At least, that's how it was supposed to work. If only people adhered to the general consensus, life would have been easier. In particular, it was women's rights, which weren't always as forthcoming as people believed. Even in the backyards of the great nations, the ones who swore they wouldn't stand for sexism or prejudice, females still endured being cast in stereotypical roles. Oh, it wasn't spoken of, and few admitted to it. But similar to school-age bullies, it still happened. Working on a Friday night in a pub was bad enough. It also being St. Patrick's Day only made things worse. Clover almost jumped. A load of dishes heading for the back was the only thing stopping her. That was 5 smacks on the ass in the past hour, and she was coming dangerously close to her tongue-biting limit. Unfortunately, it didn't matter who was at fault. There were 2 rules for female employees. The customer was always right, and all breakage came out of our wages. That part of the job sucked. There wasn't any real course to remedy the situation either. In the real world, screaming harassment all the way to the unemployment line wouldn't pay the bills, and she had a lot of those. With the economy in a slump the way it was, there was always a pretty face looming in the background, waiting around to snatch up any job that came their way, and more than willing to put up with a few drunken gropes in exchange for a steady income. Clover placed the tray on the counter, nodding at the bartender. Beer she could fetch. Single shots weren't a problem. When it came to fruity specialty drinks, though, she was out of her league. They weren't requested often, but on the busiest night of the week, someone always snuck in 1 or 2, making them put all the staff behind. Unlike in movies, there was no shake your body and the drink at the same time going on. "You're already waiting, aren't you?" another server asked, her chest heaving a sigh. Her voice was just loud enough to be heard over the buzz of pub-goers talking over the background music. "Sorry, V," Clover answered. "I've had crazy orders all night. There must be a full moon out or something." "What are you up to?" she chuckled. Being middle-aged has its advantages. Number 1 being she wasn't at all opposed to the attention the patrons gave her after having a few drinks. V leaned to the side, whispering in her ear, "I've had 7. 7 whacks on the butt, or pinches, wasn't something to be proud of." "You win," Clover shrugged, a stray red curl flopping in front of her face. Even tied back, stranglers always managed to find a way loose. Bottom lip jutting out, she blew air upward, forcing it off her forehead. It sprung right back out again, rebellious to the end. "Don't feel bad. Boys your age tend to like chasing cougars." V's hands mimicked paws with claws. "Oh," one hand covered her mouth. "Silly me. I almost forgot. You're still holding out for a true love. How precious. And delusional." Clover chuckled. "You aren't going to convince me." Her head shook, the defiant curl whipping from side to side. A bar is not the place to meet a knight in shining armor, especially not this one. She glanced over one shoulder. "Who needs all that? I, for one, can't be bothered using a can opener as foreplay," she argued. "A single night is good enough for me." V's hips swung, bumping with her coworkers. "Live for the moment. That's my motto." The bartender, Chad, nodded in her direction. "What do you need?" 2 pot of golds, 1 lucky leprechaun, and a couple green ales." Clover glanced at her watch. "You better keep those claws out and pick the lucky guy for the night. It's almost last call." "Maybe I'll take 2. V chuckled, patting the sides of her updo. "What?" "Nothing." Clover glanced away, brow arched. "Tch," V smirked, pulling out a bright red lipstick. "You didn't go to college." She admired herself in a thin metal strip on the counter before applying a generous coat, lips smacked, rubbing together. "How did you know that?" Clover's head whipped back toward her coworker. "I never mentioned anything about my education." It's always easy to tell if a girl's been to college, V chuckled. They don't call it a higher learning for nothing. There's a lot of experimentation. Sexuality being at the top of the list. Understanding your own body is freeing. I know what I like, and I certainly ain't afraid to ask for it. You went to college? Clover eyed the woman beside her with skepticism. Really? When was that? What, just because I work as a waitress in a bar, you don't think I have a diploma? V laughed. I'll tell you a story. I put myself through school, thinking I was going to have a better life. You know where I worked? No. A strip club, V went on. Oh, before I got there, I had such high expectations, much like you. In the end, I decided I wanted to eat more than keep my misplaced dignity. The first few times it was awkward, but then she looked thoughtfully into the distance. It was exhilarating. I kept telling myself I'd keep working only until I landed a proper job, and I did. I graduated with honors and was sought after as an employee. So what happened? Clover asked. I lasted 2 days before realizing the life I had been striving for was boring, V shrugged. It wasn't for me. Wasn't what I wanted to be. Working in a nightclub suited my personality. It makes me happy. That's what's really important in life. I might not take my clothes off in this joint, but the atmosphere is the same. She inhaled deeply, nostrils flaring. You really enjoy being a waitress? Clover asked, picking up her tray of drinks. You don't find it lonely? Taking home guys you never get to know all the time? Men aren't company. They're pleasure, V cackled. You're still young. She popped a stick of gum in her mouth. One day you'll understand. A person doesn't have to be alone to be lonely, and likewise, being alone doesn't mean someone is lonely. I have great friends and a supportive family. That's enough for me. What about you? She winked. Better get those drinks out there before the customers get all rowdy. Clover's forehead creased as she turned away. Lonely. She had her grandmother. No one could be alone with that woman around. But was she lonely? She shook her head. No. Pardon? A woman snapped, her upper lip arched, staring at her. You're not going to give me my order? Yes, Clover exclaimed, handing her the green drink. Sorry, she took a bill from the woman. Keep the change, she snapped, rolling her eyes. Clover turned, heading to her next stop. I'll go far on a quarter, she mumbled under her breath. That summed up how the night was going. While V stuffed bills in her bra from tips at the end of the night, she was always counting change. A siren sounded, alerting the customers as to the time and staff to head behind the bar. It was all hands on deck for the final 15-minute rush. The moment the hour changed, Clover headed back with trays of dirty dishes to be washed. By the time she returned, only vacuuming remained. Do you mind finishing up? V begged, body swaying from side to side. I have some people waiting in the parking lot. Where's Chad? Clover asked. He had to take off, V replied. His kid has a fever. There isn't much left to do. Sure, Clover nodded. A time when she'd needed to leave early for family reasons was looming over her head. Scratching a few backs now for the same in return later made sense. I have no one to rush home to. Aw, V's lips formed a pout. You really should find yourself a man or two. It takes the stress right out of life. She grabbed her purse, strutting to the door. Without looking back, she was gone. Finding a man isn't going to clean the floors, Clover huffed. At least it's faster when I'm alone. 30 minutes later, the place was presentable, and she was free to go. She pulled the front door closed with 2 hands, making sure it clicked before turning the key. Her first night closing, she'd been forced to call the owner for help. Apparently, the heavier it was, the harder it became to shut properly. Clover exhaled, chest heaving a sigh. Her mini car was the only one left in the parking lot. Even the light was flickering, requesting she vacate from the premises post haste. She slid into the driver's seat, neck rolling a stretch before the key inserted into the ignition. Knock, knock. Clover jumped in her seat, letting out a high-pitched squeal at the sight of a man with a flashlight standing outside. An officer. The window slowly rolled down a few inches. What can I do you for? She asked, wary of the man. Anyone could rent a police officer's costume. She glanced in the rearview mirror. The squad car was probably legit. It's awfully late to be sitting in your car alone, the officer said, flashing the light inside her vehicle to look around. Have you been drinking? What? Clover exclaimed. No, I was working. I just closed up. It was a long night, being St. Patrick's Day and all. I see, the officer said. And everyone else left before you? There's no other staff to corroborate your story? They left early, Clover explained. Chad, the bartender, had to get home to his sick kid, and the other waitress has guests staying with her for the weekend. I offered to close up so they could go. I'll need you to step out of the car, ma'am. The officer moved aside, waiting for her to comply. Clover inhaled deeply. Is this really necessary? I've already told you I was working. I'm tired and I want to go home. It's my job on a night like tonight to make sure the citizens are safe, especially from drunk drivers. The plate's clean, his partner said, strolling up from the rear. You ran my plates? Clover asked in disbelief. I'm just heading home from work. It's been a really long night. Driver's license and registration, please. The partner held open his hand, snatching the identification as soon as it was available. I'll check these out. You okay to administer the test alone? Test? Her forehead wrinkled. What test? Sobriety, ma'am, the original officer answered. He bent down, drawing a white chalk line on the parking lot surface. I'm going to need you to walk straight, placing one foot in front of the other. You're kidding, Clover huffed, blowing the rogue curl from her face. I have the worst coordination in the world. Isn't there a thingy I can blow into? I'm afraid we're all out, the officer said, rolling his eyes at his partner. If you refuse to take the field test, we'll be forced to drag you down to the station. For leaving work? No amount of complaining was going to change anything. She stepped on the line, carefully taking each step, arms out of her sides. Instantly, she was transported back to being a young girl at her first and only gymnastics class. Point to the toes. Clover licked her lips, her legs and arms trembling. She'd fallen more than once that day years ago, and the present wasn't looking much better. She teetered on the line, swaying slightly. That's when her foot went off the chalk. Whoops. I've seen enough, the officer said. You'll have to come with us. But I'm not drunk, Clover pleaded. You smell like beer, can't finish the sobriety test, and were found sitting in your car outside a pub after closing hours on St. Patrick's Day. There's a full moon, too, his partner added. I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't take you in, the officer said. We can do this the easy way, or... Clover held up her hands. Fine. Her thumb came down on a button, locking her car. You aren't going to cuff me, are you? Well, a man said, walking into the interrogation room. Looks as if you aren't drunk. We're going to cut you loose. How nice, Clover said. 3 tests later, and... She glanced at her wrists. I don't even know how long I've been here. Better safe than sorry, the man said. You couldn't walk a straight line, after all. I was tired, Clover argued. I had just finished a long night waiting tables. People shouldn't drive when they're that tired. Clover stood. That's why I was sitting in my car, stretching. She snatched the envelope of her belongings off the table. I'll need to be dropped off back at my car. We aren't a taxi service, ma'am, the man replied, shaking his head. Taxpayers don't spend their hard-earned money, so we can drive you around. You'll have to make your own way. How am I supposed to do that? Clover complained bitterly. I was brought here in the back of a cruiser, and I literally did nothing wrong. Try a taxi. His lips pursed together, forming a thin line. Clover opened the envelope, pulling out a phone. Great. The battery's dead. Arms flopped at her sides. There's a public one in the lobby you can use. He held the door open. If I were you, I'd hurry. That parking lot you were in doesn't allow vehicles overnight. There's a good chance your car could get towed. No. Clover rushed to the waiting room, grabbing a receiver from the beige phone on the wall. Hello, I need a taxi. A towed car was the last thing she needed. Of course, with her luck, or rather lack thereof, there was little doubt of what she'd find. Chapter 2. Shamrock. Chug, 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 the group chanted, fists banging on the table in time. Oh! Supersized mugs slammed down on the wooden table, vibrating the rest of the glasses. A tiny bit of green foam remained at the bottom. A refill appeared almost immediately. Shamrock! 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 He grabbed the handle, tipping his head back to gulp the frosty brew. If someone else was paying, beer wasn't going to be wasted. Not by the resident bad boy, anyway. Titles were to be respected, and his reign had already lasted well over a decade. He held the records for drinking and dates in one night. Actually, the same night. Next, Shamrock yelled. Another mug slammed down to the table before him, overflowing on touchdown. 2 days we'll never forget, and Shammy's still living for the moment, Kurt said, raising a glass of water. May you keep our dreams alive. What's this? Shamrock complained. You're not giving up already, are you? It's St. Patty's Day. We have until morning to raise a ruckus and turn green. Kurt chuckled. You have until morning. Shamrock waggled his finger to his friend. You and I are the last holdouts. We aren't like these whipped guys with their wives. Hey, Mark snapped his head sideways, glaring at the two. I may be old, but I'm getting some every night. Shamrock chuckled. So am I, and I don't have anyone to tell me what to do day in and day out. He glanced around, nodding at a girl at the bar, showing a bit too much skin. I might just take that filly for a ride later. You're the life of the party, Scott said, pulling out his wallet. I never could keep up. To be honest, settling down was a relief. It meant I didn't need to compete with the king anymore. He nodded at the lone waitress for his bill. You're leaving? Shamrock asked, the tone of his voice rising. You're kidding. It's only 9 o'clock. Just being prepared, Scott replied. The twins are a handful. I don't want to leave Maggie alone all night while I'm out with the guys. It doesn't feel right. Actually, I only came because... Because? Shamrock exchanged glances with his friends. Spill it, guys. What's going on? I've been trying to tell you, Kurt admitted, pushing his glasses aside. I asked Clarice to marry me, and she said yes. He smacked Shamrock on the back. Now you're the last bachelor in the group. He tossed a $20 bill in the middle of the table, the others following suit. You win the pot. Congratulations, man, Mark stood. I always knew it would be you. No one beats your records. Wait, Shamrock said, watching each of his friends stand. Where are you going? You can't just drop something that big on me and then up and leave. Maggie and the twins, Scott shrugged. I have to go. We'll do this again soon, Mark said. Don't worry, we'll still need to hear all of your stories about being single. We're living vicariously through you now, mate. I promised Clarice I wouldn't be late. She's waiting up for me. Kurt saluted, winking. You have at it tonight. Keep the legend alive. Shamrock glared into his mug. Sure, I'll just hang out here. An empty table was depressing, the bar seeming more comfortable. Hey, Jay, what can I get you? The bartender asked. A little advice, he answered. What's so great about married life? A guy gives up all his freedom, and for what? Yeah, Jay scratched his head. I can make about any drink you want, but I'm not really the one to ask about relationships. That's all for tonight. I hope you enjoyed the chapter reading. Bye.